Brian Dickson's life journey took him from the dusty roads of rural Saskatchewan to the halls of justice in Ottawa. There, as Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, he earned a solid reputation for hard work, clear, sound judgments, and the tireless pursuit of justice for all Canadians. Robert George Brian Dickson's journey began in Yorkton, Saskatchewan, where he was born to Irish immigrants Thomas and Lillian Dickson on May 25, 1916. Brian was close to his younger brother Tom, and during these early days nurtured his lifelong love for the outdoors and horseback riding. As a boy, he often accompanied his father, a bank manager, on weekend visits to the office or to the homes of customers. It was the time of the Great Depression, when bankers often saw difficult and heartbreaking situations as customers lost their life savings, and with it, all hope. Their misfortune had a profound effect on the young boy. Brian would go on to develop a lifelong compassion for the less advantaged in Canadian society. Brian's mother, Lillian, was one of the first women to graduate from Dublin's Trinity College. A talented singer and lover of books, she fostered an early appreciation in him for the arts. Brian received his elementary and secondary education in the public schools of Unity, Weyburn, and Regina. He was an intelligent and hard-working student throughout his school years. In 1932, the family moved from Regina to Winnipeg. Here, Brian entered the University of Manitoba at the young age of 16. He attended law school and articled with the firm of Scarth, Guild, and Honeyman. He enjoyed the challenges law school offered and quickly displayed a first-class legal mind. He went on to graduate in 1938 at the top of his class. He met and fell in love with Barbara Sellers, the sister of a university friend. At 17, she was, in Brian's words, very beautiful and very wonderful. Because of the Depression, Dickson could find no legal work and so could not afford the substantial Law Society fee. Instead, he worked in a non-legal job at Great West Life Assurance Company in Winnipeg. As World War II broke out, Dickson was already active in Canada's 37th Field Artillery Corps. In 1940, he entered Officer Training Corps and spent that summer at Camp Shiloh training with field guns. Because Dickson would soon be off to war and possibly not return, he and Barbara put their wedding plans on hold. In January 1941, he sailed from Halifax to England, where he showed promise as an officer. He returned to Canada in May of 1943 to take a staff course. United with Barbara again, the couple married in Winnipeg's Holy Trinity Church on June 18. They moved to Kingston, where Dickson attended War Staff College at the Royal Military College. Just after D-Day, in June 1944, Dickson was posted back to England. He was sent to Normandy in August, where the Canadian forces were engaged in a fierce battle that would turn the tide of the war. It was here on August 26th that his group came under heavy fire during a reconnaissance mission. Fierce fighting ensued, and when the smoke cleared, 6 Allied soldiers lay dead. Many more were severely wounded, including Dickson, who lost a leg in the battle. After 3 months of convalescence in Europe, he returned to Canada on December 11, 1944, the day before the birth of son Brian Henry, the first of 4 children. In 1945, Dickson joined Aikens Macaulay, one of Winnipeg's leading law firms. By the mid-50s, he had forged a reputation as one of the city's leading corporate solicitors. In addition, he became president of the Manitoba Red Cross and took charge of a major operation when the Red and Assiniboine rivers rose in 1950 to flood southern Manitoba. He had a bed brought in to Red Cross headquarters and round the clock directed 4,400 volunteers over a 3-week period. It was to be the first of many instances where he served the people of Winnipeg. Brian and Barbara's second child, Deborah, was born just after the flood. Subsequently, the Dickson household would ring with the laughter of 2 more children, twins Peter and Barry. During this period, he was chairman of the board of the University of Manitoba and also sat on the boards of the North American Wildlife Foundation and the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Dickson was not an obvious candidate for the bench. The task of a good commercial lawyer is to keep one's clients out of court. Dickson was very good at this, and so he argued few cases. But the court needed an infusion of talent and energy, and Dickson, at 47, was at an ideal age for consideration. On November 29, 1963, he was sworn in as a judge of the Manitoba Court of Queen's Bench. He loved his work as a trial judge, calling it the best job in the world. Dickson's longest and probably most significant civil trial was the Hoffer versus Hoffer case, dealing with property rights in a divided religious community. The care he took to prepare his reasons in this case would eventually be rewarded. A few years later, Dickson learned that members of the Supreme Court of Canada were impressed by his work in this difficult area of the law. In 1967, Canada celebrated its centennial. That year, after 4 rewarding years as a trial judge, Dickson was appointed to the Manitoba Court of Appeal. As a trial and appellate judge, his judgments were written in simple but powerful statements that clearly explained the essence of the case and its human dimension. The relationship between law and morality was a source of lively debate in the 1960s and 70s. It was a time of changing morality, and the court was at the center of this change. A judge, said Dickson, must endeavor to apply what he, in the light of his experience, regards as contemporary standards of the Canadian community. He must be at pains to avoid having his decisions reflect or project his own notions of what is tolerable. By this time, after 10 years on the bench, Dickson had earned a reputation as a fine judge, worthy of consideration for appointment to Canada's highest court. His achievements were recognized in 1973, when he was appointed to the Supreme Court of Canada. In 1974, he and Barbara bought a farm just west of Ottawa and moved their horses from Manitoba. Working days were long, and weekends were spent doing research, writing, and meeting with law clerks at the farm or at the court. The clerks were chosen from the top students in the top law schools. Dickson was always impressed by their dedication, intelligence, and sensitivity. He appreciated and valued the importance of the new dimensions young people brought to the discussions. Throughout his career, Dickson believed it was imperative that judgments be understandable to people without legal training. We are not, he said, writing simply for legal academics or other judges. The cases we deal with affect every man, woman, and child in the country. The 70s were a dynamic period, and as a member of the Supreme Court, Dickson made important decisions in cases involving women's and Aboriginal rights, personal injury damages, the due diligence defense, the rights of prisoners, and the patriation of Canada's Constitution. In 1984, Bora Laskin retired, and Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau appointed Brian Dickson to the highest judicial position in Canada, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Dickson set about to streamline the daily workings of the court and improved relations with the media by setting up a modern press room for the first time. He also oversaw and encouraged a more active role for the court internationally. As Chief Justice, Dickson was witness to one of the most important developments in Canadian history, the birth of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Prime Minister Trudeau considered that the courts should preserve and protect the civil rights of Canadians rather than Parliament or a particular legislature. The court was now charged with interpreting the law in a new light. The combined effect of the Charter and the social changes of the 1980s put Dickson and the Supreme Court at the center of a new set of issues that affected all Canadians.
Because the rights and freedoms which it spells out are basic. They have to do with the normal rights and mobility rights and legal rights. And it's a magnificent document, and it's going to be our task to give it life, give it meaning, and so that it lives up to what Canadians hope it to be.
Decisions handed down during this period dealt with a broad range of fundamental rights and freedoms. Among them were the interpretation of the Charter in Hunter versus Southam and the application of the Charter in Operation Dismantle. Freedom of religion came under examination in R versus Big M Drug Mart, and freedom of association was interpreted in the Labour Trilogy. Abortion was at the center of R versus Morgentaler and Tremblay versus Daig, and freedom of expression and the notwithstanding clause came to court in Ford versus the Quebec Sign Law. Other issues included hate speech in R versus Keegstra, equality in employment, and sex discrimination were judged in the Action Travail des Femmes versus CNR case. Proportionality test and reasonable limits in R versus Oakes, and Aboriginal rights in the Garant and Sparrow cases.
One of the High Court judges who helped shape the nature of Canadian society over these past few years announced his retirement today. Brian Dickson is stepping down as Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Canada.
I can imagine no greater privilege for a lawyer than to be asked to sit as a judge on this bench. As Canada's court of last resort, we sit in final judgment of the rights of all of those who make their home in this magnificent land.
Dickson retired from the Supreme Court of Canada in 1990, but his life's work was not finished.
So I will invite him to speak to us.
In his retirement years, Dickson continued to make significant legal and social contributions in many areas, from Aboriginal and military justice to international trade and justice reform. Dickson worked tirelessly for all Canadians. Looking back on Dickson's career, it's not difficult to find admirers. Former Manitoba Chief Justice Samuel Friedman said of Dickson, "One could not want a better judicial colleague. He made good judgments with great clarity." On Dickson's appointment to the nation's highest court, Maclean's magazine said, "Judge Dickson's lucid writing set him apart from others on the bench, often making even his dissenting arguments more memorable than the majority that carried the day." Pierre Trudeau's appointment of Dickson to Chief Justice was one of his last official acts as Prime Minister. In retrospect, it proved to be among his most enduring. Today, there is scarcely an area of Canadian law that does not bear the mark of Brian Dickson. He died on October 17, 1998. His place in history as one of Canada's greatest and most respected judges and one of its finest legal minds is assured.